All right, well, my starting animation there didn't work exactly as I expected, but I thank you guys so much for being here today. I'm sorry I missed, I think, last Thursday and Tuesday, but today hopefully make up for it. I want to offer some suggestions on how you can make the score editor a bit more Dorico-like. So there are a number of reasons why I personally would say the score editor in Cubase is nowhere near meeting the requirements of somebody who's used to Dorico. But if you are scoring to film or you are just working in Cubase with instruments and tools that you need to use in Cubase, like busing and routing and stuff like that, that's not flexible in Dorico, this is a great way for you to kind of make it feel a bit more familiar. So here are, I've got over here a list of the 5 things. These are the top 5 things that just bugged me as soon as I opened up the score editor because it was not intuitive how to do them. And these are all things, just looking at the list, these are all things which actually what I've done is I have mapped them to MIDI controllers. And this is really nice because they're physical buttons, which I always prefer over menu diving. And although they're a pain to set up, you got to set up macros and Project Logical Editor presets in some cases. It's a bit annoying, but I'm going to walk you through at least the principles of that here, and then they're done. They just work, and it's really nice. And now working in the score editor actually as a composer with a few caveats feels quite a bit more like I'm working in Dorico. So caveats, I mentioned caveats. One of the main strange things that you cannot get around in Dorico or in Cubase Score Editor versus Dorico is that the score editor does not show like a staff and you click on the staff and you start putting in notes. That doesn't happen. It shows a score version of MIDI parts. So in other words, if you have a track, you got a piano track. In Dorico, you just click in an empty bar and you can start writing in, whether it's with the keyboard, MIDI keyboard you're playing in, or you're writing notes in manually. You start by clicking into the staff, right? On Cubase, there's no such thing. So I'll show you what I mean. Let me throw on my headphones, because this is probably one of the first sort of major barriers, I think, to people working in the score editor. So I can't just go here to my strings and click on this empty bar and then start typing in. I can't do that. Even worse is if I have something like maybe let's imagine that I have a flute track here. Oops, that's okay. I chose the drum editor by mistake there. So to avoid confusion, let me go ahead and remove that. And let's just go and say, oh, well, I guess let's just call it a flute because it's really just for demonstration. You don't see a flute pop up here, but back in Dorico, if I add a flute, I'm going to see a staff for a flute. You won't see this until you draw in a MIDI part for your flute. Now you have to select it, and now I can see it in my arrangement. So that's kind of a caveat that you really can't get around. The closest that I've gotten is that it's nice to actually select a range in Cubase, and this is actually not one of my 5. This is kind of a bonus tip, I guess, is that if you have a range selected, you can actually go to the MIDI command or MIDI menu, and you can say merge MIDI in a loop. And then it brings up this little window, which I just leave whatever, and I hit that, and boom, I get a MIDI track right there. And if there's, what this has done is it's merged everything from the other tracks into this. But if you're starting out a project and you do that same merge in MIDI loop, it'll actually create an empty part matching your range, which is kind of a nice way to just get started. And again, I created a macro in Cubase, put it on a button, and I just hit a button and I get a new part so that I see it here in my score editor. Anyway, that's a little bit off topic, kind of a bonus topic. So let's talk about note input. This is the first step you have to engage with, right? Is we've got the score editor open and we want to start writing. So in this case, the best thing to do is actually use this thing here called step input. right there. And you can actually set up a button to do this. So I've got a button here that sets that up. And when I hit the button on my keyboard, let me just show you. When I hit the button on my keyboard, step input gets enabled. And how do I do that? How do I get that button to actually work? You go up to the edit command, or sorry, actually no, I do this in the MIDI remote down here in the lower zone. This is my S88 keyboard. It's set up and it's very easy to use. I'm not going to give a tutorial on using the MIDI remote setup, but you just hit a button on your controller. It's going to bring it up on this display, and then you click on this little link over here to open up this window. And then when you click a button, let's say I click this one, it's already assigned to setting an insert length for 16th notes, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you can just browse here and you can say, find that, toggle on and off step input. And then forevermore, that MIDI button is going to turn MIDI step input on and off. But step input really is the way to go if you want to have kind of like normal note input, right? So if I'm in my score editor, and I go ahead and I toggle this step input on, you see I actually kind of get this nice orange caret for, I can even use the up and down arrow to switch my staff. And then, from there, I can plug in notes. Now I'm getting notes here that are 8th notes, but quantized to a quarter. And this is the second caveat, aside from the fact that you have to have empty MIDI parts before you'll see them in the score editor. When you input notes, it's really thinking key editor here. So it's thinking about, for example, what is my quantized value up here? And so if you have the quantized value set to a quarter note, and then you are inputting 8th notes, it's still going to quantize, put an 8th note and an 8th rest. So you have to know that this is a little different from Dorico. Dorico, if you choose an 8th note and you input a note, it's not going to put in an 8th note and an 8th rest and skip to the next beat. It's going to put in an 8th note and you'll be able to put in an 8th note right under that, right? So what you really want to do here, and this is speaking to the second topic on my list, is you want to set up some MIDI buttons for note duration, right? So we've got note input set up on this step input. That's how you want to engage step input or engage note entry, is with step input, and you do get this nice, very familiar caret. One thing I will actually just mention as an additional kind of bonus thing, I love having the green cursor, and I love being able to loop, like I can actually loop these notes, and it's going to, I love that because I wish Dorico had that, right? I love that because it really functions like the key editor. This is really just a score version of the key editor. So it's really, really very convenient in some ways that, I kind of wish Dorico had. Anyway, so step input for note input, note duration is the next thing. So note duration buttons up here are very similar to what we get when we're in Dorico. They're just on the left-hand side. But again, if you have some buttons, if you have some MIDI buttons set up for this, it's really nice. And I have these set up. You have to find them in your key commands. And let me just bring up that window here for you, and you can see what that looks like. The thing you want to look for in your key commands is not quantize, but insert length, right? Set insert length right here. These are the commands that you want to use. So you could put these on a stream deck. You could also use the MIDI editor built into Cubase to map a MIDI button to any of these values, even the toggle, dotted, and triplet, okay? But that's the key, is to look for set insert length. And that's really nice because now once I've got my step input on over here, watch these over here. I can go to whole notes. I can go to half notes, quarter notes, 8th notes, 16ths, and then as I'm inputting my notes, oops, boy. This is another weird thing which I will point out as I've learned. So you get this like shadow note, right? which is annoying to me personally. That's because the pencil tool is often selected by default. As soon as you select the object selection tool, that goes away, right? So if I go over here and I go into note input, so I'm turning on step input. Oh, I've got the loop turned on. Let me turn the loop off like that. And now I go and I select, you know, a quarter note, for example. Then I'm going to get quarter notes. I'm not actually sure why it's showing eighth notes there. It should not. Maybe it's, again, my quantize value. It may be that I have to set that up, but typically, typically what would go in there is an eighth note or a quarter note, depending on the buttons that I have chosen up here. And I've got those connected. Gosh, I really don't like the way that it creates that shadow note. Connected to MIDI buttons that allow me to switch back and forth from whole note, half note, quarter note, and so on and so forth. Now, another added bonus, I think, to using a MIDI controller for these buttons is that you can do this in Dorico too. So if you're like me, you might be used to using the buttons like 6, I think the number 6 on your keyboard in Dorico is a quarter note, 5 is an eighth note, 4 is a 16th note, 7 is a half note, and 8 is an octave or a whole note. You can use those on your keyboard and they work very quickly, but you can in Dorico assign MIDI buttons to those commands as well. So it could kind of really, I haven't actually done that yet, but I think it could be a nice unified experience where if you get used to either using your Stream Deck or a MIDI controller set of buttons for triggering these note links in the score editor, you could also assign them in Dorico, and then you have one interface whether you're in Dorico or the score editor, which I think could be really nice. So the third thing is combining these editors. This is the third thing that I think really makes working in the score editor a lot better. Having the score editor open, but also the key editor. And I'll show you a couple of examples of why. So if I have my Cubase project open, this is again another button that I've created, and I click here, I've created this button that opens up 2 editors. So I open up the main window. It's annoying, that shadow note. I've opened up a main window that is the score editor, but then I've also got in the lower zone in Cubase the key editor. And this gives me some tools like, for example, I can go ahead and just select notes in the key editor, and you can see that they're selected over here. It's nicer sometimes to see what's going on in the key editor. There's other information here available, like if you have MIDI on different channels, if you want to see what the velocity of those notes are, if you wanted to see what articulations are assigned to them, if they weren't standard articulations. That's all stuff that's visible in the key editor. So having the key editor and the score editor open at once is nice. And what I've done to achieve that, you can probably hear my cat in the background, so sorry about that. But I have the settings set up like this in editors. The open score editor is my default MIDI editor, and double click to open in the window. And then I have a macro, I believe, or is it a project? I think actually it's Project Logical Editor preset. This is not entirely necessary to have the score editor open in a window and the lower zone be your key editor. It's just that this way is very quick for me. So I think, yeah, I created this PLE preset called Combo Editors, and it looks like this. If media type is equal to MIDI, container is a track, and then pre and post commands are select none, post-process commands, select whatever's in the loop, so whatever you have set as your locators in Cubase, and then open the key editor in the lower zone and open the score editor in a window. So the combination of using this PLE preset along with, I found these settings in the editor settings and preferences, the combination of those two would reliably get me to this place. You could also, if you're familiar with workspaces in Cubase, you could also arrange your windows, and then you could create a workspace, and that would be like a quick way to flip into this workflow, right? But seeing things seeing your notes in the key editor at the same time that you can see them in the score editor is really, really helpful. So the fourth thing that I like is, this is something I do a lot of because it speeds up my arrangement process when I'm actually orchestrating my piece, is octaves up and downs. You know, like how frequently do I want to take a violin part and, you know, throw it into two violin sections an octave apart, doing an octave spread, something like that. And so being able to have that quickly set up, which again is a PLE preset. So I just have octave up, octave down. These are just MIDI buttons that I'm pressing for whatever notes are selected. And you can see them changing over here in the key editor as well. And if you know the key editor command, which is shift up and down, you can use key editor commands in the key editor, and then they'll obviously be reflected over here as well. So octave up and down, that was super important to me. And then the last thing that I really find helpful, because I do try to do as much scoring to film as I can possibly get my hands on, is seeing time code and markers in the score. This is something I love about Dorico, is the way that I can see my markers with time code values, because it really helps me make musical decisions and understand where my bars are hitting relative to my markers. So the way that you want to do that is you need to go to layout settings here in your score editor. It's this little window here. And you want to go down to markers and time code, and you want to make sure that show markers is set up, and you want to change this default setting vertical position to time code staff. All right. And then I think down here for time code frequency, every bar is what I like. And then I get this display. I get this nice time code staff at the bottom. And if I have a marker, let's say, let's just create a marker track for demonstration purposes. And let's say right here, I go ahead and I add a marker. And this marker is called Start Music. Like so, right? Then there's a little trick here, which is that, I mean, I feel silly saying it because it's so ridiculous. I don't know why Cubase makes us jump through this loop. But you have to switch the time base to linear. And look, it shows up right there. It's amazing. And it's great. I don't know why your marker track has to be linear time base, musical time base, not there. I don't know. It's probably something that the software requires. Now, if you're like me, you might load up a marker track and you can't see the time base. How do you get that? You right click on it, go to track control settings, and then you choose the kind of track, which is marker. And over here in the hidden controls, you'd see toggle time base, and you just go ahead and select it. So you'd probably, if you were using the default, you'd see that, you select it, you hit add, and then you hit apply, and then you hit OK, and now it'll be there and you can toggle it back and forth. Okay. So that is a lot to talk about. I hope that that didn't, drive anybody too crazy. But these are 5 things that, for me, were like the biggest things that I felt like every time I opened the score editor, I just hit a brick wall and I was like, forget this. I'm just going to go into Dorico. These were the 5 things. Now, to recap, a couple of caveats. You have to have at least a blank MIDI part if you want to see it in the score editor. Having a track is not good enough. Second caveat is that when there are certain things you can see in the key editor that you can't see in the score editor. So you want generally to have both of them open. In Dorico, these are really nicely arranged in the right mode where you can have your score up above and you can have the key editor down below. I hope maybe they'll incorporate that in a future version of the score editor. If you have questions, I really appreciate everybody being out here. It's so nice to see a good solid group of folks joining in. If you have questions, please let me know. If you're curious how I set up the Project Logical Editor presets, or you'd like more information on that, maybe a tutorial on setting up the MIDI remote tool, which I think was introduced back in maybe Cubase 11 or 12. So it's been around a while. It's a really, really easy way to map MIDI. But if anybody has questions about that, post in the comments, let me know. I would be happy to do more videos about how I set up these PLE presets, and so on and so forth. If there's other issues you're running into where you're like, yeah, these are not the top 5 problems I have with Dorico. I have this problem and this problem. Let me know, because I'm in an ongoing process of trying to get to the point where working with a score editor is much, much more conducive to my workflow. And I feel like I'm getting there. I know there are going to be updates to Cubase improving this score editor. I'm sure of it. So I look forward to those in the future. But in the meantime, I'm trying to make life more livable. So anyway, thank you guys. Thanks, Shubas. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Garrett, for being here. I really appreciate everybody's support. I hope you got a lot out of the video, and I will see you guys hopefully next Tuesday if my schedule allows. And